All right, good afternoon. We have a special guest here today. It's Congressman Guy Reschenthaler. Uh, Congressman Reschenthaler represents Pennsylvania's 13th Congressional District. He's also the Chief Deputy Whip in the United States Congress. And we brought him here today to talk about the Congressional Review Act and the Title IX revisions that have recently been enacted by the Biden administration that are set to take effect on August 1st. So, Congressman Reschenthaler, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, Jonathan, thanks for having me here. Really good to be on with you. The fact that we went to officer development school together, we're in the Naval Justice School together. You're one of my best friends, so it's an honor to be on the podcast with you. So thanks for having me here. Just to talk about the Congressional Review Act, Jonathan, I think this is one of the tools that we don't use nearly enough in Congress. I mean, think about it. We always complain as conservatives about the administrative branch run amok and that they have too much power. Well, we have the Congressional Review Act to rein some of that in. And what the Congressional Review Act does is it says that once an agency promulgates a regulation, we as Congress have a period of time to review that, and then we can vote on it in the House and Senate, send it to the president to nullify the regulation before it takes effect, or if it's already taken effect, to block it from being enforced. We should be using this a lot more. And this example right here with Title IX is a perfect example of when we should be using this. Mary Miller, my good friend from Illinois, she introduced this legislation. I jumped on right away. And it basically tells the Department of Education they can't use the gender equality and mixed matching genders and having trans kids play in women's sports or boys playing girls sports, for example. They just can't do that. We've got to honor the spirit of Title IX, and that's why the CRA is so important.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, you were one of the first co-sponsors on the bill, and there's been 72 additional co-sponsors. What from your position as Deputy Whip, what do you see this bill, going through? It's still in committee, but getting through committee and getting support on the House floor?
I'm very optimistic on this bill, Jonathan. We've had a lot of success so far on CRAs during the times that we've used at this Congress, and I don't think this is going to be any different. For one, it's correct on policy. We don't want to have boys playing in girls' sports. Think about it. Why would you even have Title IX if you could have men playing in women's sports? It totally defeats the purpose of Title IX. So for the integrity of that bill, by the way that Congress drafted, we should have this. And then as far as political, that's a legislatively focused, policy focused. In terms of just raw politics, this is a huge winning issue for Republicans. If you were to poll this issue, we come up winning 70% to 30%, if not more. So we should be racing to pass this bill, both for policy wins and political wins as well.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I checked the bill this morning, and there's been no Democrat co-sponsors, and I found that very strange because, not to get into the politics of it too much, but there's a lot of honorable Democrats. Like you said, it's a 70-30 issue. It doesn't matter where you fall on the political scale. If you're a conservative, a progressive, Republican, Democrat, folks want their children to be safe. They want their privacy, and they don't want them to be harmed by whether it's sports or in other situations where there are locker rooms and other private spaces, and Title IX envisioned having separate facilities, and that's all out the window. So let's say it passes and President Biden vetoes the bill. Do you think there would be a chance, even an opportunity to maybe override that veto, given it's an election year?
Well, we win no matter what, and that's the beauty of this CRA, because let's say that we pass it. I don't think we'll pass it with a veto-proof majority. That's largely because the Democrats are beholden to their far-left radical base, and that's that 30% in the polling that thinks that boys playing in girls' sports is a good idea. So the Democratic Party is so beholden to this far-left radical base. That's why you're not seeing Democrats jump on board. But getting back to sending this to Biden, if we send this to Biden and put on his desk, he's got a very difficult decision to make. And that's exactly what we want as conservatives, because he's in a lose-lose. Either he's going to sign the bill and then isolate his far-left radical base, which is going to depress motivation for them to come out and vote in November, or he's going to do the right thing and sign the legislation, admit that his agency was totally out of control, being run by woke, unelected career bureaucrats, for example, and then we win on policy. But these are the exact kind of scenarios we should go after as conservatives. Put the Democrats in a bad position. Make them decide if they're going to support their far left radical base or the vast majority of the American public in good public policy. That's on them to figure out. It's on us as conservatives to fight the fight and put them in those situations.
Absolutely. And you raise a good point about these unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats, whether it's the Department of Education or any agency in the federal government. It seems like it's been out of control for a long time. And for example, there's been 2 previous occasions in Congress, and just in the last 10 years, where they've introduced legislation to add gender identity as a protected class to Title IX. Both of those have failed, haven't even made it out of committee. So what gives the Department of Education the gumption now that they can seize power from Congress, which is clearly a congressional power? It's a major question. It's of economic significance. What has emboldened them, these unelected bureaucrats, to seize power from Congress? And why are other members of Congress from all political parties not taking this more serious as a separation of powers issue?
Well, because we have to understand that for the Democrats, it's not about checks and balances. It's not about procedure. They'll only use that to advance their own agenda. You notice that they'll never talk about procedure, the Constitution, process, none of that when they're advancing their own agenda and when those levers of restraint in our government work against them. What they'll do, though, is they'll do anything they can to advance their far left radical agenda. And you see that playing out here. You brought up a really good point. I was going to bring that up. The Democrats have had 2 bills on this very point to bring this language into federal law, and those have not even made it out of committee. So the will of the people, the will has been decided upon. You can't get those bills passed. So what the Democrats do is they fall back on the bureaucracy, which is way too out of control. I want to talk about the REINS Act in just a second, but they fall back on these unelected career bureaucrats who have zero incentive to do what's right by the American public because they're immune. You can't fire them. You don't know who they are a lot of times. And so they'll cram through their far left radical agenda through the administrative state. Now, getting back to the administrative state, that's why we need to have legislation next year when we control the White House, when we control the Senate, when we expand our majority in the House. Our number one priority, Jonathan, has got to be passing the REINS Act, or as I like to propose, the REINS Act on steroids. What the REINS Act is doing, what the REINS Act would do is the REINS Act would say if the CBO scores any regulation promulgated by an agency at over $100 million, $100 million sounds like a lot, but almost all they do is going to score over $100 million. If that happens, then the REINS Act would require congressional approval. I like that. I think that should be our compromise position. I think our position really should be REINS Act on steroids. And what I mean by that is I think that it's time to bring the rogue bureaucrats to yield to congressional power, to Article 1 authority is given to us in the Constitution, and say any regulation that's promulgated by a federal agency must be approved by Congress. And also, and I don't care about the score because I don't trust the CBO to score this. The CBO, if you try to eliminate the Department of Education, do you know the CBO scores that as a cost to the government? So taking out a government agency, the CBO scores that. It's completely laughable. These are complete political hacks. So why even defer to them in the first place? So what we should do is we should just say any regulation that's promulgated, we don't even kick it to CBO. That needs to have congressional approval. Additionally, every regulation needs to have a sunset. Think about why is it when we're in Congress that we sunset a lot of our bills? The Jobs and Tax Act, for example, that President Trump passed, it's up for debate right now because it's set to expire soon. Well, why don't the agencies do that? You never see a career bureaucrat promulgating a regulation saying we're going to sunset this in 5 years. So every single one of their promulgated regulations should have a sunset, and then it should come back to Congress for approval so that people are in control, not unelected career bureaucrats who just happen to be far left radical activists in the government.
Wow, that is a really good point. And to that, I mean, the Supreme Court is set, all the legal experts are saying the Chevron doctrine is on the axe with the Supreme Court. Hasn't come out yet. That opinion set to be released. That would just be perfect with this proposal because it would take back the power of the purse. It would take back Congress's authority, and it would remove some of that centralized power that has really usurp the will of the people or Congress. So that is a wonderful idea, and I hope that gets passed.
It would clearly be a 1-2 punch for getting back to the way our framers intended government to run. The Chevron decision, I think, was incorrectly decided. We've had to live with its consequences now for decades. We've empowered these agencies. They're the judge, jury, and executioners a lot of times. And that's incorrect. And it's just because a liberal Supreme Court at the time okayed and gave this power to the executive branch completely outside of the scope of what the founders intended. So if we get Chevron overturned and we pass REINS Act on steroids, then it would do a lot to bring the government to bring the executive branch under control and once again reassert Congress's authority over the government. And every American should want that, because when Congress is in control, you, the American people, are in control, because we're the ones that are closest to the people, especially the U.S. House of Representatives. So this should be a big win for everyday American citizens. It's a big win for the kind of government our founders intended, and it'll do a lot, I think, to stimulate the economy, because what you're seeing a lot of times is these regulations are just completely punitive on industries that we need, and we can run down those. But what better way to increase economic growth by making sure that regulations have a light touch, that they're laser focused, that we're in there using a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, and not just shutting down the door to innovation and job growth. So this should be, Jonathan, besides energy production and making sure we're unleashing American energy, the REINS Act, or like I said, the REINS Act on steroids should be our number 1, number 2 priority heading into the next Congress.
Well, you've sold me on the REINS Act, that's for sure. So I'm fired up to learn more about it, and I'm sure our audience will too. And however they can support that legislation coming down the pipe, sounds like it'd be good for America, good for all Americans, not just Democrats or Republicans. All Americans can benefit from a robust economy and limited government and good fiscal responsibility. It sounds like it would help reduce the budget, reduce inflation, all of the above. So that's a well thought out plan. So, Congressman Reschenthaler, yesterday, Citizens Defending Freedom filed a brief in the Northern District of Texas in the lawsuit, Texas versus United States, on this Title IX final rule, seeking an injunction and a stay from it being implemented. One of the things that we focused on as Citizens Defending Freedom is to seek a nationwide injunction. Now, as conservatives, we don't, obviously we don't always agree with that, because in the past, leftist activist judges have been sought out and gotten nationwide injunctions on conservative legislation. But in this case, I believe it's appropriate, given the stakes of Title IX and all the women and girls that will be affected. What are your thoughts on a nationwide injunction? And would that be a good stopgap in the meantime until hopefully the CRA passes?
Well, Jonathan, no, this is the absolute correct thing to do. And I want to thank you. I want to thank Citizens Defending Freedom. We need your organization to grow. We need your organization to be better funded. We need your organization to file more lawsuits, because the Democrats have been using lawfare for decades now, and to the detriment of the conservative movement. I mean, you see it over and over. We could look at for example, oil and gas infrastructure, them blocking pipelines that would reduce energy prices for Americans, allow us to export energy and become more dominant in the energy sector globally. You see it right now with President Trump. You've seen it with a lot of members of the former administration, where they've used lawfare to go after former officials in the administration. So it's time we fight fire with fire. And we should stop hiding behind process and procedure, because the Democrats don't care about that. As I said before, for them, it's all about their far left radical agenda. For us, our main focus needs to be stopping their far left radical agenda and getting the conservative movement back on track. Part of doing that is meeting them where they're meeting us. We can't cede the courtroom to the Democrats, or we'll continue to lose. So I applaud your effort to file this. We should have a nationwide injunction. In terms of policy, it's the right thing to do. In terms of politics, it's the right thing to do. And if we can start beating them here with this issue, it will help us fight other issues in court as well and roll back their far left extreme agenda. So thank you for doing this. And anybody listening to this, please, Citizens Defending Freedom, get behind this organization, fund this organization, applaud their efforts, because you guys are on you guys are the tip of the spear in terms of these legal battles. We need you engaged in court so we can fight here on Capitol Hill, so people back in the states can fight at state government and get involved that way. But you guys have an important mission. I just want to applaud you for acting and continuing to fight in the legal sector. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Really appreciate it. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know how valuable it is. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure you're getting ready to watch that debate tonight as well. So thanks again for your time. And I'll give you the last word, if any. But thank you again. And really appreciate everything you're doing for the United States, for the Constitution, and for we the people. We applaud your efforts and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for all you're doing. Just if I were to get a last word, it would be this. We've got to do everything we can to win this fall. It's so important. We got to take the White House. We got to grow the majority in the House. We got to take the Senate. And then we've got to do a lot to take back these state general assemblies. And again, we got to do a lot to make sure we're fighting these courtroom battles. So it's all hands on deck. We need everybody engaged. And thank you for your listeners for doing just that. And thank you for you and Citizens Defending Freedom for all you're doing in the fight.
All right. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan.